In the name of my ancestors, peace forever and always. Welcome to another edition of the Reality's Temple on Earth. Of course, I am the host or the gatekeeper of this internet ministry. On YouTube, I am known as the mighty Angelsnupnup7, your brother and hopefully your friend, Taalik Ibn'rad. I hope you enjoy the video that follows this introduction. Again, peace forever and always, and respect you.
All over the place. You're a psychiatrist, and you're author of a theory. Here's what she's saying. First of all, white people are dying out. Into the next century, everybody on Earth may be of color. And we're scared about it. Already we're a minority. Did you know that? I'll guess 25% of us are white, maybe less than that. And that's the reason we're racist. We're not only afraid of dying out, but we're also jealous because we have no color. You're laughing. How come we spend so much time in the sun trying to get brown? Can't make a baby of color. And that's the reason for racism and lynching. And how do you explain? Do you believe we're racist? No, we're not racist. Yes, we are racist. What is this, an accident that all the cities are becoming blacker and blacker while the outer reaches of major metropolitan whiter and whiter? That's an accident? Oh, come on. When you get on an elevator and you're the only white person on the elevator, how do you feel? What'd she say? What'd she say? Frightened, she said? Oh, she's scared of elevators. Okay, here we go. Frances Cress Welsing, M.D. You are a Washington, D.C.-based psychiatrist, and you're author of the Cress, your middle name, we should say, Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. You call racism white supremacy. To be sure, a provocative and controversial theory on skin color and oppression. Well, I'm ready. So is this mostly but not exclusively white audience. Let them have it, Doctor. Boy, oh boy, do you need an escort to get out of your speeches?
No, now, let me just give you a little background. This paper was written approximately in 1969 and presented in 1970. It was written for a group of black psychiatrists who were looking at racism.
Yeah.
It was also written because as a psychiatrist and working in a hospital trying to treat black people and white people, but recognizing that the majority of the problems that black patients had in a psychiatric hospital, when you took a history, you would run smack into racism. So I knew I had to understand racism to help solve the mental health problems of black people. So out of my brain computer, putting in the question, why do we see this behavior? Why have we seen it for hundreds of years? So I thought about these two things, basically two facts, that even though the white population says that people of color are minorities, that it is the white population that is the minority on the planet.
That's the reality you're saying.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
That in spite of the fact that black people, non-white people have heard over and over again, you're genetically inferior because you are non-white. That in reality, white skin is a genetic recessive status, not as said by Frances Welsing. Meaning that if you and I were to have a baby, the baby would have color, and you make the contribution and I don't. That white plus colored, well, wait a minute. It's not Frances Welsing that is concerned about the disappearance of white. Ben Wattenberg just wrote a book, The Birth Dearth. There have been multiple articles in the newspaper talking about the decline of Western populations.
Yeah, here's the Washington Post, just to name one. We are a depopulation bomb, the withering of the Western world. Here, incidentally, this was the percentage of the West's population in 1900, the turn of this century, about 30%. This is where we'll be less than 10% in the year 2075. Here's where we are about today, 15. So we're not having babies.
So whites are not having babies, and there is the concern about white genetic annihilation. In other words, I look at, this is Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday holiday, and people will say, well, here's a man who talked about love. Yeah. Why was he killed? And I say that the deeper logic is, what if all black and white people and non-white people and white people love? What would happen to white people? White would disappear. You see, just mix all of the people on the planet up together.
In other words, if race didn't matter, or if color didn't matter, it follows with the jet planes.
No, I'm not saying if it didn't matter. I'm saying that, indeed, if there was a mingling of all of the people, because
that's what I'm saying.
Okay, fine.
Absence of prejudice.
The ability, no, wait, don't confuse what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we mixed all of the people presently on the planet, stirred them up,
the white freckle-faced people would be gone.
Genetic recessive status would disappear. And that if I did a survey and everybody didn't have to, you know, face anybody, if I said how many people who are white want their children to be white, want their grandchildren to be white, want their great-grandchildren to be white, want their great-great-grandchildren to be white. And I've gone all over the country in England and asked this question. Yeah. Everybody wants the children and the generations to remain white. Yeah. If you do, then you have to do something to make sure that that happens. And I say that what the thing is that is done, and particularly in relationship to black non-whites, because we have the greatest genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation.
Because you're the blackest.
Because we, right.
The most color.
Right. We have this ability to produce melanin pigment. We have more of it than anybody else. And so the most pressure is on black people. As a matter of fact, the black people learn, all non-white people over the world learn. If you're black, stay back. If you're yellow, you're brown, stick around. If you're yellow, mellow, white, right. I can go to England and the people can just say the same thing. Doesn't matter whether if you go to the Philippines. Because there has been a confrontation of brown with white. Everybody knows the more pigment you have, the more pressure that is on you.
Yeah.
But they didn't understand why. I said the why is for the purpose of white genetic survival.
All right. And you're saying that blacks have no similar hidden, subconscious anxiety about their blackness being undermined by the presence of white?
We don't have that fear. And I think that this is something that is not understood. You see, in other words, if I don't worry about, as a matter of fact, under white supremacy, the non-white people try to get lighter. You see, because the less pigment you have, the less threat you are to white, and so the greater opportunity that you have.
Yeah. The mass inability of whites to live and attend school in the presence of non-whites, manifested by the patterns of black and white housing and education throughout this country, and indeed throughout the world, is seen, according to your thesis, in terms of the color confrontation thesis, as the apparent total psychological discomfort experienced by whites in situations in which they must daily face their color inadequacy when they confront their neighbors of color. You go on.
I predicted. Look, I wrote that in 1970. I said you cannot have integrated housing. You cannot have integrated schools.
You still believe that?
Well, I mean, the evidence. I always look at the evidence. If Mr. Black and Mr. White live next door to each other, they have the same job, the same income, the same car, the same furniture. Yeah. They both walk out of the house in the morning. Good morning, Mr. Black. Good morning, Mr. White. Yeah. But Mr. White is still looking, but you've got something that I don't have.
You're saying he's saying that subconsciously. Now, wait a minute. All right, we'll give you a chance in just a moment.
Wait a minute.
Now, wait a minute.
Let's look at
They're nice people. You're really going to like them, I promise you. You know, once in a while, you know, a couple of them stop before they come up here, and you got to keep an eye on them.
Let's look at this.
You know, go ahead, look at it.
Very fortunately.
Now, let me just understand this. See, the reason they're groaning is, you know, that's an awful bad rap to take. Let me just arrogantly try and reword what I think you're saying. Now, don't get crazy. Let me say.
Please, I'm
Mr. White is looking at Mr. Black, and he's not consciously saying, don't you dare.
Not consciously.
So it is under here.
Not consciously. I mean, we could go on for 3 hours. Not consciously.
All right. All right.
Okay. I am saying that this behavior is at the subconscious level, and there's a lot of evidence. For example, just on Saturday, the New York Times had an article talking about the percentage of people who want a tan. 66%. I have the article if anybody wants to look at it later. 66% of white adults think they look better with a tan. 70% of white adolescents think they look better with a tan. What do white people? Ooh, I look so pale. Now, this is not something that Cress Welsing is putting on people. White females even say their ideal mate is who? Tall, dark, and handsome. Now, Phil, I mean,
wait a minute.
Okay.
Just a minute. That whites do indeed desire to have colored skin can be seen by anyone at the very first signs of spring or summer, when they begin to strip off their clothes as many pieces as the law will allow, often permitting their skins to be burned severely in an attempt to add to their white, pale, colorless bodies, rendering themselves vulnerable to the dreaded skin cancer in the process. Most cosmetics also are seen as an attempt to add color to their skin. Such coloring makeup is even now being provided for the white male. Well, guess who has you-know-what on at this moment? And if you don't mind my saying so, I do. I put it on myself. I don't go to makeup. I have a shine on my nose I've got to take. But I feel better with a little color. And I've got the whitest skin in the whole neighborhood. I'm telling you. No kidding. I'm not bragging. I'm saying as a matter of...
This is not... My discussion is not about making fun of white people. My discussion is trying to explain behavior. People come to psychiatrists.
I value your effort.
Why am I doing this? For example, when I was a very small child, I wanted to understand why black men were lynched. I asked my grandmother and parents, why would this be done? And my grandmother gave a statement. She said something like, well, some people just want to act ugly. But that wasn't sufficient, you know, as a psychiatrist.
May I interrupt for just a moment? Here's the read on that, and I know you want to add to this or make it just a little more complicated. The black male was lynched and often castrated because of the white male fear of the black male's... The myth is the black male's extraordinary sexual capacity. So he was lynched by frightened white males who feared that if he ever got anywhere near the white women, that somehow the white male would be a sex. Now, you want to add to that.
His sexual capacity, what are we talking about? I say that the fear is that the black male can cause white genetic annihilation. And this is why the attack on the genitals, there's no history in the world of any non-white men attacking white men's genitals. But why do white men feel the need to zero in on the black man's genitals and cut them off?
Yeah.
You see, and a lot of this is played out in symbolic behavior in this culture. For example, the culture says, keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. Look at something that,
I'll get there to just 1 second.
See, look at something that people do not look at. Look at the game of billiards. See, the psychiatrist knows that through games we play out subconscious activity.
Yes, they do.
Okay, now look at this game. Here's a game with colored balls.
Yes.
All over the table.
And guess who gets to shoot the ball?
The white ball knocks all the colored balls under the table.
And often saves the black one.
And then the black ball, right.
Till last.
Till last.
Because there's a specialness about the black. Yeah. Let me, Dr. Welsing, now, you're not surprised at the response of this audience. Just a couple of things here for the sake of our conversation. First of all, we welcome your contribution. That is, for what it's worth, I certainly do. Which does not mean, therefore, that I or this audience necessarily agree with everything you say. But let me tell you what I think is important. I don't think we've asked enough questions about this thing called racism, which has, in my opinion, the capacity to bring us down as a nation, if not, certainly not only here, but in many parts of the world. It is in the American bloodstream, and it's especially manifest here. So good for you trying to figure this out, because it's my, no kidding, it's my opinion, not enough smart people are really speaking to the... We run away from this. Another point you make, you think this, the token black is an effort to assuage this hidden feeling that we have? Is that, how do you explain?
Well, the token black, I mean, you might say that was under pressure. Do you see that you have to, the civil rights movement, you have to include some non-white people. But every effort is made to move around that. Mm-hmm. And I understand, I mean, it's tragic. Mm-hmm. And it's injustice. Yeah. And I'm not just saying here, I'm saying all over this planet, whether we're talking about South Africa. And see, one important example that people do a lot of surface talking about is the Holocaust. See how quiet it is? Well, the Holocaust in Germany was because what? Because the Semites of the Jewish religion were said by the Europeans to be non-white people. The Holocaust didn't just occur.
So you think that there's...
Wait a minute. Do you see what I'm saying? If we have denial going on about this, all you have to do is look at what the Nazis are saying today. And what the Klan is saying today.
So you're saying anti-Semitism has the same root?
If you read Hitler, if you read all the documentation...
Anti-Semitism has pigmentation as it's under the...
Had to do with the Semites. Look at the part of the world that the Semites come out of. I say that the word Semite comes from the Latin prefix semi, meaning half. It's a word like mulatto. It means a combination of black African women, Greek and Roman soldiers, and you had that mixture. 2,000 years of continuing mixture in Europe made a lighter group of people that were still considered to be non-white.
When you use lighter and you say recessive, and you use the word recessive gene, I think I know what that means.
This is not my language. This is the language of formal genetics.
That's true. But you equate recessive with inferior. Now, just hang on one second. I don't claim to be the first one to bring this to your attention, but aren't you dangerously close to Joseph Mengele with all this?
No.
How about Shockley?
No. Wait a minute. No. What I am trying to do is explain some very, very important behavior on the planet that other people have shied away from dealing with.
Yeah.
Do you see? And to say that because you talk about it, it's just like if somebody studied tuberculosis and say, well, are you against the tuberculosis organism? No, you're trying to understand
it. Well, but you do bring judgments. I mean, so when you equate recessive with inferior, that's not science. That's judgment.
No. I'm not. That's not what I say. I say that the people who are feeling an absence of color, that they look at themselves in that way. And they have a response to therefore say, if I can get in charge of all these non-white people, then I am going to be superior. So nobody is uncomfortable in the white collective with all the white superiority that goes on every day. Look at television. White. Wait a minute.
All right, I got it. Hold on a minute. All right, hang on just 1 second.
Goodness.
Hold 1 second. There are a couple of things which you, listen, there are people out there who say, look at all the progress we're making.
Look at the Urban League report.
I am not one of those people. Nevertheless, there are examples of integrated communities. Truly are.
But see, the answer is not a question of are there a few black people living where white people live. The issue is that if we are going to have peace on the planet, there has to be justice. And white supremacy, where you have the tiniest number of people on the planet holding down the vast majority of people on the planet, happens to be the highest form of injustice.
Yeah.
And so if we are going to have peace, see, I'm not talking about destroy white people. I'm saying, but we do have to eliminate white supremacy. And I say in the back of that paper, the challenge to white behavioral scientists, help people who classify themselves as white become comfortable with their color and comfortable with their minority status, so that they are not feeling negative and then mistreating all of the people that they say are, what, non-white.
Are you there, caller? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here, Phil. Hi. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm white. I can't believe that she's saying that the white people would like to be, I'm assuming she's saying black, not of a darker skin color, but black. I myself am very, very fair-skinned, brunette with green eyes, and I have no desire to be dark.
Why?
Why? I like my color. I was attractive enough that I went to modeling school. I do admit that I do use blush. I do not use blush to, as you say, give myself color. I use it to accent my cheekbones, give myself better appearance.
Do you sunbathe?
No, I don't. And as a matter of fact, I love the beach, and my husband and I, when we've gone to the Bahamas a few times, when we have, I have to wear sunscreen. You know, I don't turn tan.
Okay.
I get red.
Right.
I grew up on the beach, and I had a minimal tan. But
You see, but I'm
no,
well, hang on 1 second.
I want to be clear. Is she saying I want to be dark, but I don't want to be black?
Yes.
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 And
So you'd like to be a little darker than you are?
No, I wouldn't say so. I'm very pleased with my color.
Well, then why do you put rouge on?
To accent my cheekbones.
Highlight the cheekbones.
But why do you suntan? Because the American Dermatological Society would prefer...
She doesn't, probably for that reason.
But she goes to the beach.
She does go to the beach.
Because I like the water.
Gotta go.
I like the water. I grew up in California.
Let me try one more. Are you there, caller? Go ahead.
Hi. I'm also white, and I'm very comfortable with being white. I think that it's crazy to think that white people want to be black. You know, we might want to have a little color, but I wouldn't want the features of a black person. And as far as...
The what?
She does not want the features of a black person. Do you see, this is...
Hold on a minute.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, in other words, that's racism, but pigmentation isn't?
Well, no, I'm saying that to say I wouldn't want to be, I mean, I can be happy who I am and not say something is negative about the other person.
Well, look, we've got a break here. Is there a, you know, one of the agonies here is half of this audience does not believe that they're racist.
Oh, wait, well, let me...
I am not more than half.
Let me ask this.
You can't fix it if you don't know you have it.
But wait a minute, I want to ask...
How do you explain what's going on here in this country?
I want to say then, who is? That's like going to Germany. I went to Germany in 1957. And I wanted to live with German people and ask them, did they understand what they were doing?
Yeah.
You know, taking their neighbors away and burning them up. Did they understand what was happening? Yeah. Everybody that I talked to knew what was going on. They did nothing. But if you go and say, well, now, who believed what Hitler was saying? Nobody. Everybody says no. You see, every single person says, no,
so
I didn't have anything to do with it.
The people who are saying they're not racist, you're accusing them of not doing it.
No, I'm not accusing. What I would do is, if you have to take a break, is give my definition. You see, give my definition of what I say that racism is.
A functional definition of racism, white supremacy, which you identify with white supremacy, is therefore, for all practical purpose, as follows. The behavioral syndrome of individual and collective color inferiority and numerical inadequacy, which includes patterns of thought, speech, and action as seen in members of the white organization or race. And we'll be back in just a moment.
People are racism. Okay, there is a lot of people who do have that in them. But I think the majority of the people like people as they are. And if you're educated...
You mean you like your kind, you mean?
No. All kinds of people. It doesn't have to be your kind because I can look at a person...
Any of it? This thing we call racism?
No, because I live in Colonia and we have a whole development of black people. Okay, and... Well, wait. No, I went to school with them, okay, and I learned to deal with them. I think that if you learn to...
Yeah.
Well, we mixed as a group. In other words, we weren't different. We weren't treated different. We weren't treated different, so we were all one kind of person.
Hold your thought. You hang on a minute. What's the matter? What?
This study that was done in 69 and 70, I'd like to know what you've done lately to erase and eradicate racism and to improve
How do you feel about what she's saying?
I don't care for it at all.
I want to just say that I feel I am a racist, but every black that calls Whitey or Whitey is also a racist. And
Wait a minute. Let me answer that. You see, within a family, people might call each other names. But when we come to the white people on the planet, the majority having organized themselves for white genetic survival, then when a white person can determine what is going to happen to a person of color, that is a difference, because then we're talking about a system of power that can say you can or you can't, or if I want to go back to Germany, because people do a lot of talking about the Holocaust. When the Semites were told, put on this yellow star because you're not white and you can't go to the university and you have to live in the ghetto and you are going to be removed from your homes, that is power. It's not just a question of somebody saying, I don't like John, I don't like Betty. When you have the power to make it impossible for people to live a constructive existence, then that's a difference.
But what we're trying to figure out is why we want that power to do that to another person in the first place. And you're saying white people do it to people of color because they feel,
I think it's a matter of economics more than anything else. And if you're a fair person, you're a fair person. And if this, I don't care who is my neighbor. If they can afford to be my neighbor, if they are the same economic ability that our family have, then they're fine. They're welcome to be my neighbor.
Oh, wait a minute.
We'll be back. I'll give you a chance in just a moment. Everything's studied. I mean, figure it out, we study it. Except racism, either whatever scholarship there may be about it, we seem to be running away from, or we're not attracting, our guest accepted, some of the big academics to this issue. You wanted to say.
I'd like to know why Jimmy the Greek had to be fired from CBS for his opinions about blacks, and she can come on national TV and give her opinions about white, and she's not going to get fired from her job. White people can't talk anymore. She got it. I mean, everybody and now he has to go write apologies to all black.
Well, I was just going to, I don't think that you can equate what I'm saying to what he said. I mean, you might, and
blacks are moving away from their own.
See, I'm not, let me say this, that I'm not surprised that, you know, what I'm saying might upset people. Now, if you just look, all of the studies that people who say they're white do on black people, the black system, studying the black status, studying this, saying this about blacks, and saying, I mean, the literature is just packed.
But from a behavioral standpoint, I do not think
we have to have an explanation. See, that the Cress theory, that's one person's idea. I challenge everybody in the audience to write about white supremacy behavior. What is your idea about it? Put your idea out there so that you can explain this very considerable behavior on the planet.
I'm not sure you're going to get the majority of the white community to agree that the majority of the white community is engaging in it.
But wait a minute, let me say this. See, I'm not here complaining about what people who classify themselves as white. I made an analysis. I said that basically I see that people who classify themselves are trying to survive genetically. And I am not saying you cannot do that. But I am going to say what it is, and I really advocate that non-white people on the planet stop expecting for white people to commit genetic suicide.
Doctor, are you aware that within your own culture you also have racism? In other words, my neighbors moved away from the blacks who were moving in next door to us, and so they wanted to move away in order to give their children a better education. I'm talking about Jersey City, where I am coming from.
Your point?
And my point is that you also have racism within your own culture.
What are you saying is the racism?
In other words, blacks do not want to live among blacks. They have their own social order. In other words, if my doctor next door to me is black and he prefers not to live among the culture that's moving in to my neighborhood, this happened. I'm evidence of it. It happened many years ago.
Well, are you saying that let's say if you address people of Irish descent, if they move because they have a higher income, are you saying they're conducting racism against their own people? I think that you're clouding the issue. I think that you're clouding the issue about black and white.
Over here, please. I want to give you more time, and someday I'll be a czar, and I'll have all the time.
Yes, I do believe that there is a such thing as racism among black people, but I believe it's in response to white racism, as opposed to, black people just wanting to go out and get white folks.
If you jump on my bones enough, I'm sooner or later going to call you names, or my kids are going to call you.
It's self-preservation.
Yes.
I believe there's racism everywhere, but I think it's more like you're not used to people, you hang out with your own group, and...
That's true, but why is that? Dr. Welsing is offering here a kind of anthropological theory of racism, which has to do with our fear of, that is to say, white people's fear of their diminishing numbers. We're afraid we'll become extinct. She goes one step further to say that intermarriage scares us because it takes our whiteness away. And if everybody were free without all these terrible prejudices and fears, then it certainly, common sense would allow us to conclude that at some point down the line, no whiteness, that is to say, as we think about it in the West, would be left. And she is saying that deep down in here, unconsciously, we're scared to death of that. And that's why we've got black neighborhoods and white.
I disagree. I think you're scared just because people are different, and if you got to know them, you wouldn't be so scared. I don't think it's because we're afraid of being white.
Just for the moment, putting aside theories, and the good doctor is only a theory, I don't accept it as fact, and generalities, and putting this thing on a one-to-one basis, I turned during the stuff, I turned to this lady of color sitting next to me, and I said to her, I don't know about you, but I have never wanted to be black. I'm perfectly comfortable. I've had this white skin for 70 years, and I'm perfectly comfortable.
She agrees. She agrees. That's not a very...
I wouldn't know how to do it differently. And this lady said she felt the same way about the color of her skin. So,
I've never wanted to be white because I've always been happy with my color.
But you haven't denied her thesis. She is saying that you don't want to be black. She knows that. And she's saying something else. She's saying that your interest in not being black is resting somewhere way down in your soul, and it's causing some of us to be scared to death that we might be.
You want to know something, Phil? I never even thought about what this lady brought out today, and having heard
That's what you call subconscious thinking.
And having heard it, to the little bit that I've thought about it, I must say that I totally disagree with her. Although she has a background and I don't.
Yes. If you're a man, you get to talk.
With all this talk, with all this thing going on, and everything that's been said, I haven't heard one person make mention, especially you, Doctor, about the transition that's been taking place over the past 25 years. Of 20 years ago, whoever heard of a black mayor in the city of Montgomery, Alabama? I have a business in Patterson, New Jersey. Joe Clark, the principal. Well, Joe Clark, he's doing a fantastic job. He's black. What about all these other things that are happening? Everything that's going on in television today. When did you see a Bill Cosby show become such a big thing on television? He's black.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to commend you on your work. I think it's incredible. And also, I'd like to know how you feel about the recent Newsweek article that came out last week.
We're all women. Women.
Wait, no, just hold on. That addresses the basic assumption that we all are from a common ancestor, meaning we all as humans. And Newsweek revealed that this common ancestor was, in fact, a black woman from sub-Saharan Africa. I'd like to know your comment on that, as well as, do you think that this kind of research, which has clearly been substantiated, really will reach a plateau of exposure? Because I don't think white America is ready to accept the fact that they are indeed genetically descended from a black woman.
Well, I have said that for a long time, that the simplest explanation about the arrival of the different colors on the planet is that you start with black. And from black, if black produces a condition of albinism, then you have white. And then if you mix the two, you get all the colors in the middle. Now, white cannot produce black, but black can produce all of the colors on the planet. So I say, since the paleontologists and anthropologists are saying human life began in Africa and the first ancestors for everybody were black. Now, the very fact that people have trouble with that, you see, says something about the psyche about what people, after white supremacy has been established, what people end up feeling about color.
I think it's very unusual that a psychiatrist would give a biological reason for racism, because I really feel like racism comes from psychology, and if we took, as you said, all of the genetic pool and mixed it together and did come out with a one world color, I still think people would be racist. They'd find something else to come up with.
Wait a minute.
Make people superior.
I am a medical doctor, and a medical doctor has to include the whole body as well as the functioning of the brain that produces the end product of behavior. Now, people, indeed, and I have said, people could have, one of the things that led me to this paper, I said, now, people could have done foot size. You know, I wear 10B, so everybody who has 10B, but people didn't focus on foot size. If they did focus on foot size, some psychiatrists or behavioral scientists would have to come along and raise the critical question, why? But people settled on color. And so as a behavioral scientist, I just put the question in my brain computer and said, why? Why did they settle on color, and what is the significance of color? And let me just throw this out. A few weeks from now is going to be Valentine's Day. And what are the ladies going to want? Chocolate candy.
Really, that's beginning to sound a little paranoid to me, you know.
Well, yeah. Why? Let me ask you this. I'll tell you, who asked this question on my show?
Why do white people say chocolate is erotic?
Why is chocolate cake devil's food cake and white cake is angel food cake? Muhammad Ali asked that question on this program. And we'll be back in just a moment. What? Yeah.
Assuming for a moment that your theory is correct, what steps do you recommend to eradicate racism?
Well, I would like the people who classify themselves as white to really get in love with their own color and the fact of reality that... Wait a minute.
They're angry that you suggest they are.
Wait a minute. You see, the proof of behavior is in what you do, not always what you say. But if not that, I advocate that people, black people, non-white people, begin to look at it like a chessboard and understand that if people who classify themselves as white are playing for white genetic survival, then they cannot do the things that black people expect them to do, like help across the board. And that black people are going to have to get accustomed to playing the black side of the chessboard. It's not about hate. See, when you sit down to play chess, you don't hate your opponent. You just know that the white side of the chessboard that always moves first, you see, is playing offense, defense, and the black side has to play defense, offense. And that the anticipation is that the white king is going to be trying to what? Checkmate the black king.
Excuse me. Let me just get a couple of other of your observations. First of all, William Raspberry had, I thought, a very insightful article about you. Talked about lap time. That's a big thing with you. Children who are babies, infants, who don't get the, hi, we're glad you're here, tactile kind of. You told Essence magazine, among other things, we cannot wage struggle if the people are weak. You're talking about blacks now. No black female should have children before the age of 30, and no black man should become a father before the age of 35. Before child rearing, we should be going to school, going to the library, educating ourselves. We must create mature, mentally developed parents. Then we will be able to produce children with self-respect and a high level of functioning pattern. Now, wait a minute. Before this white audience gets too goo-goo gaga over this, the point ought to be made that wouldn't be bad advice for not a few young white folks to keep in mind.
Let me say this, Phil. Wait a minute. Phil,
adequately spacing the children builds a whole-centered child who has gotten special attention. You do not... A family should consist of no more than 2 children, no closer than 3 years apart. The 3 years give you a chance to...
Phil, please, let me just say this. That I'm talking about all of the horrendous problems. If you advocate, everybody in here white, read the Urban League report about what is happening to black families, okay? So I'm trying to help black families that are in the midst of the white supremacy dynamic get off of the dependency kick, because I don't see the white supremacy changing. But if black people understand that, and follow those regulations that I have set up. You see, no children until 30, no father until 35, no more than 2, so that people can actually take care of their own children.
Okay. Are you there, caller? I'm glad you waited. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm a white female engaged to a black man, and anybody out there who says that there is no prejudice in this country is wrong, because I deal with it every day. I personally get called names. I get called nigger lover, all kinds of things, just by stepping out of the house with my fiance.
And your point is?
My point, what I'm trying to say is, everybody that I talk to that is black, every one of my fiance's friends, tell me they don't have anything against me. They don't have anything against any white person that is nice to them. I have never talked to a black person or anybody of any other race, really, that has ever said, I hate whites. I hate whites. I don't get prejudiced. I don't get, discriminated against by his black friends, but I get discriminated against by other white people, and he gets discriminated. I'll tell you, black people in this country have more respect from me than anybody in this whole entire country, because I know what they deal with. A white person, unless you are dating or are closely involved with a black person, don't have any idea what black people go through in this country. They have no idea what it's like.
I thank you for your contribution. You will forgive me for taking leave, and we wish you and your fiancé a long and happy life. I am glad you called. Thanks. Hi, I'm glad you called, too. Go ahead.
Yes, Cress Welsing and Mr. Donahue. I am a black medical student from Massachusetts, and I was a little put off by Dr. Welsing's comment that it seems as if white supremacy is going to take over our lives, so forth. But what has happened to me is I have taken control of my own life. I've always grown up in a middle-class society. I've never been in the ghetto. And I don't have any problems relating to other black people or to white people. But I realize that I am the one who's in charge of my life. I make those decisions.
Do you believe race?
Nobody is going to... No, being black is not going to stop me from succeeding. And I haven't had any problems with white people telling me you can't succeed. So I don't think that being black is an excuse for anything. And I also, as a black person, I have never tried to be white, which was indicated earlier. Those are all the comments that I wanted to make.
Well, I'm not saying that. Let me just say this. That I'm sorry, the racism is there, and my grandfather was a physician. My father's a physician. I'm a physician. Black people can do many things in the presence of racism, but I don't think that we should deny that it's here.
And we'll be back in a moment.
There's a lot of validity to your comments on integration, but I think you lose me and a lot of white people when you bring up billiard balls, chocolates, and I want roses.
I think it's dangerous to only address white discrimination and white prejudice without also looking at black prejudice and black discrimination against white people.
I feel your report is somewhat outdated. I think people have changed a lot since 20 years ago.
Racism's kind of going away?
Well, not totally, but somewhat, yes.
Yes.
Bill, I'd like to address my comment to this lady over here in the white who just said on national television that she's a racist. God help you, my dear, because more and more people in the world are going to start looking like me. People are going to have more color. If you don't learn to accept me for my beauty...
Yes, but if we don't learn to accept what may be there in ourselves, we can't fix it either.
I accept
So please don't
Bill.
punish her for her honesty.
Bill, what she said was a blatantly racist statement. The woman admitted
it at herself.
That she is a racist. I take offense in that.
Admit it.
Racist.
They are. That's my opinion.
That is the people that you are surrounded by, and
you are too.
You what?
I said you are too, but you're just not admitting it.
Miss, I have absolutely no racism or anything towards you. I feel no remorse. I'm asking the good Lord to help you see my beauty and inner being.
I think New Yorkers are very open-minded.
Well, New Yorkers are.
Yes. I don't know any other.
Briefly.
If my white neighbor does something to me to dislike them, I'm not called prejudiced, but if my black neighbor does the same thing to me, they're standing there going prejudiced.
I was also offended by the old lady saying that she was a racist. But I feel that we cannot go forward as a society unless we love one another, unless we get along.
And we can't go forward unless, if You know, racism is a lot like cancer. You don't always know you have it. And discovering that it might be there, I don't want to make this about this woman, but if you're going to punish this woman's honesty, then we're going to get nowhere.
But she did offend me, and I'm sure she offended a lot of other people.
I don't think that it's racist. I don't think that anyone is being racist here. I think that the problem is that... Oh, God.
Over here, George, yes.
I think that they're making too much of a problem out of racist. I think that if I had a white neighbor who was low class, not up to the standards where we would, yes, we'd be just as angry.
Yeah, what?
I just had a little...
Well, you said that white people wear makeup to bring out their color. Then how come you're wearing makeup? Because you don't like your color.
Are you wearing makeup?
Yes, I have makeup on, but I think that you do have to acknowledge that the whole sun tanning industry and the makeup is because it is white people who are saying that they don't like their color. In Africa, people had all different color, makeup on. You see, but they were not saying they didn't like black.
Excuse me, earlier in the show, when Phil said, is there racism, the audience was very quiet, and he said, come on, we know it's there. When the woman gets up and admits that she's a racist, so you're damned if you do.
Provided and promotional fees paid by the
My research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
The long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans.
If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
Back in the 70s, a man named Dr. William Shockley, a noted scientist, embarked upon the mission of proving to the world that black people are genetically inferior, without, I might add, the benefit of any formal background in genetics. He became front-page news and won headlines with his controversial views. On campus after campus, unrest followed his every visit. My position then and now is that if a supremacist cannot be rationally debated, perhaps he has a point. After the debate you're now going to see, Dr. Shockley went back into oblivion. I don't claim that the 1973 interview did it alone, but I am of the opinion that it helped. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, Racial Superiority with Dr. William Shockley.
Tony Brown's Journal is brought to you by Pepsi and its bottlers. This program is part of Pepsi-Cola's continuing support of your community's cultural, educational, and business interests.
We have two very prominent educators, scholars on Black Journal tonight, and we feel that it is important to defend the First Amendment rights of all Americans. Dr. William Shockley, one of our guests, has had quite a difficult time speaking at some universities, and particularly some black college students do not agree with his theories. On Black Journal, we feel that Dr. Shockley's rights in the First Amendment area are parallel to black people's rights. That is, that Dr. Shockley must have a platform for his views if black people are to have a platform for their views. Dr. Cress Welsing, on the other side, has difficulty in expressing her views on legitimate mass media outlets because many whites do not agree with her theory of genetics. Now let's find out what the controversy is about. Dr. Shockley, please give us the benefit, basically, of what your theory is.
My principal point, Mr. Brown, is not so much a theory of black-white differences, but is summed up in one word, which is the theme of my appearance on your program and my efforts, and the word is dysgenics. And dysgenics means effectively downbreeding, retrogressive evolution. And I fear that this is worst for the black community, and I particularly welcome an opportunity to appear on Black Journal just for these reasons. And let me say also that when I first met Dr. Welsing, it was not black students who were disrupting, but white students. And Dr. Welsing made a very sincere and I thought extremely effective effort, a well-planned effort. It was not effective with these white students at Staten Island Community College, so I would have a chance to speak. In fact, I think they prevented her from saying what she wanted to say when she was trying to gain me a platform. So my main theme is that we have problems that we should face and we should look at connected with dysgenics. And I welcome any opportunity I have to bring this out so that people can look at it and worry about it.
Dr. Shockley, you are accused of having a theory that is a white racist theory. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I've considered whether or not I am a racist. Racist is an epithet that used to damage my self-esteem, but it doesn't anymore. I feel it's untrue. If you look in the dictionary as to what racist means, it means emotional feelings, irrational feelings associated with fear and hate. If I really had those, I don't think I would be here this evening. I feel that what I'm engaged in is a demand for diagnosis, and I'd like to say some more about this chart, which we'll come to probably later, which shows the disproportionate rates of reproduction for the least effective elements of the black community. I'd like to say more about that than we should in just this brief introduction. But I think there is another word that better describes what I'm involved in, and that word is raceology, which means a scientific analysis of racial differences. And I have a faith that reason is a good thing, and I feel, as you do about the First Amendment, but maybe with a slightly different emphasis. I think the really important thing about the First Amendment is it is a way of guaranteeing a high likelihood that truth will emerge as a result of conflicting ideas being expressed, and I have a thesis and a basic belief that truth is a good thing and will be of benefit to man.
Thank you. Dr. Frances Welsing, give us the benefit of your theory, please.
Well, my theory was, I wrote the paper in 1969. I wrote a paper called The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. And the sole reason behind writing that paper was an attempt to understand the behavior of white people in relationship to all people of color, every place in the world, black, brown, red, and yellow people. And the paper was presented to the Americans at the National Medical Association, the section on psychiatry, in neurology, because back in 1969, the Black Caucus in the American Psychiatric Association, we had said that racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people. That racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior, and the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people, I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Frances Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists, that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
may I take a call?
Oh, sure,
all right.
please.
Let me, so that, because we have a number of calls, and we'll see what the public wants to find out also. Just 1 second. Hello, go ahead, please. You're on Black Journal.
I would like to ask the question, why does the doctor feel that his theory, Dr. Shockley, why did you feel that your theory is correct?
Well, let me say that's a long question. Let me point out one aspect. I mean, it's a question that calls for a very long answer. I think I might just at this point say that in a time like 1 hour, we may expose a problem and encourage thinking about it, and this is a very valuable thing. But to cover either Dr. Welsing's views or mine, and let me say here are, just to show that these things exist, is a pamphlet that she was good enough to give me some time ago.
This one's upside down.
Well, that one's upside down.
Yeah,
thank you.
Right.
And this is one of my own. It's actually a collection of a debate.
The Imperatives of Ethnic Education is yours.
This is the issue of the journal. Mine was, the title of my paper is somewhat different from this, but I want to say that speaking for myself, if people would like to write to me at Stanford University, I have a post box there, Post Box S, which is the same as Shockley and Stanford. I will try to supply more information, and I'm sure Dr. Welsing will say what she can do about making telling people how to reach her pamphlet. Okay. But now let me say this chart that I held up a moment ago is very important in respect to this question of why I think there may be what proves a basic difference. But I'm going to say that if there were not a basic difference in intellectual capacity in the past, there probably will be a basic difference between black and white intellectual capacity in the future simply because of the reproduction patterns. And these are Census Bureau data, and this is the most threatening aspect. And what it indicates is that for the black women of the lowest intellectual social class, which are rural farm women, generally the education is least, the average number of children is 5.4. For women with college degrees, it's 1.9. And so this is definitely unfavorable. It is reproducing far more at the bottom end and not enough to keep even at the top end.
Dr. Shockley, can
for whites, let me just finish this. For whites, the numbers are also in this direction, but nowhere nearly as severe.
Dr. Shockley, I think that in all fairness, you should explain to the audience why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the time that you're showing this, who is keeping black people in a situation like they're in? I mean, it could be, you could turn it around the other way, where you could have very large numbers of black people who are exposed to educational opportunities like white people, who are exposed to housing, who are exposed to health facilities. Why don't you explain that at the same time that you put figures like that?
I'm sure you would explain it,
no, but
Dr.
I think
Welsing.
It's important
but
in
one must say first things first.
Mm-hmm.
And you've raised the basic question there, and that is whether the disadvantages are primarily a lack of opportunity or whether they are primarily a basic genetic difference. And let me mention one thing, which is that in certain areas there is no doubt about black superiority. Blacks are superior in visual acuity, and they're superior in a systematic way. Now, I don't expect that people will understand the details of this, but I simply want to show that quantitative work can be done. This happens to be a research job of my own. And what it shows, because these points that you see here lie on a line which is not the the central line, but they lie systematically on a line. What it says is that so far as visual acuity is concerned, blacks are systematically better than whites. It's as if their bell-shaped curve, their distribution curve, were pushed upwards compared to whites for visual acuity, or at least for the avoidance of bad eyesight, such that if the same shift occurred for IQ, it would mean that the average IQ distribution would be up by 9 points rather than down by about 15 points, which is the typical average.
Dr. Shockley, visual acuity is probably something that the system of white supremacy has not necessarily seen the need to affect the environment that black people are in so that it will alter the fact that they have visual acuity that is superior to whites. The fact of visual acuity is not attacked in the same way as educational opportunity and job performance is attacked. And I think that
it's evidence for a genetic difference, in my
you see what I'm saying? There might be many, many more genetic differences where people of color appear superior.
If I may, we have a number of people, and we'd like to get to as many as possible. If you could make your answers as, not to compromise your explanation, but if you could make your answers as succinct, I would appreciate it, because we would like to involve the public as much as we can. One moment, please. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if Dr. Shockley could explain the basic difference between the course he is taking in explaining white supremacy and the course that Hitler took during the Nazism reign.
Thank you.
Well, there are enormous differences. In fact, the lesson to be learned from Nazi history is frequently very misunderstood. And it is a lesson which Mr. Brown has told us about earlier. It's the First Amendment. It's not that eugenics is intolerable. Actually, the eugenic programs, which are the opposite of dysgenics, eugenic programs are not inconceivable. They're not inhumane. Denmark has been carrying out programs with strong eugenic implications for maybe 30 years. And it's important to note that since World War II, Denmark's per capita homicide rate dropped and is now approximately 1/20th. That is, the number of deaths of probability of being killed in a year by a violent homicide is roughly the order of 100 times less for young Danes than it is for young American blacks. Now, but the lesson, let me say what the lesson of Nazi history we have in this country, and it will protect us. It's just the thing that makes this program possible. The First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. If one believes that is not the right answer, then one has to be one of the most anti-German racists there can be. If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
I'd like to comment, because I'd like to say that I don't think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shockley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shockley is fully aware of what he is doing and why he is doing what he's doing. But the long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans. Number two, he was aware that the Semites had genetically dominant genetic material to the Aryans. And if we begin to understand the way that people who were in Europe at the time that the Semites arrived from Africa, when the Semites arrived in Europe from Africa, they were people who had substantial amounts of color and who had very kinky hair because they were from the continent of Africa. And the Europeans, the white people who were there, had a reaction, a color reaction to the Semites that is no different than the reaction and the concern on the part of people who are white in this area of the world or any other area of the world to people who have the genetic capacity to produce color, who can genetically annihilate their position. And I think it's very, very important, even though Dr. Shockley, I am convinced that Dr. Shockley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
I would like to ask question, and Dr. Shockley, if you could answer it yes or no, I would appreciate it. Do you believe that black people are inferior in intelligence because of their heredity?
I have a standard statement. It is not yes or no. It's memorized. I say at the same time every time I think. What I say is this. My research leads me, and it's a tragic conclusion really, my research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
All right. If you believe that the position relatively of black Americans to white Americans is based on a genetic inferiority, and I will accept the responsibility for that word, then what do you see as the solution to the problem?
Well, I see the first aspect of this is to prevent the problem from becoming worse by dysgenics. This first word that
Would you
that
translate
I mentioned.
Dysgenics for me and the audience? Would that be sterilization?
No. Dysgenics, you see, means what that other chart I showed you says.
Should blacks,
the least effective element.
Should blacks be sterilized?
No. I have a...
but if blacks are a problem, and we do not allow...
This is inhumane. And
Dr.
I think one
Shockley
can
wants
find more humane solutions to this.
Well, then how would... Then
I would propose something in which one of the key clauses, phrases, is regardless of sex, race, or welfare status. And this is the proposal. I call it a thinking exercise. It's mentioned in that pamphlet that I showed that you can obtain. And it goes this way, that you would offer a bonus to everyone to be sterilized. Now, we know we have a population explosion problem. We know that in India that bonuses in the form of transistor radios are offered to people.
Would this bonus be directed to black people specifically, more than whites?
Mr. Brown, what did I say just a moment ago? I said, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status.
Now, there is a group...
That's what I say.
There is a group of white people to whom this offer should be made also.
Absolutely. Now, the offer is based upon the best estimates, best scientific estimates that one can have of any genetically carried disabilities. Now, there are some, I think, that any humane person would have no doubt about. And Dr. Welsing talked about dominant and recessive genes. I want to point out that sometimes a dominant gene can be a very bad thing, and it is a very bad thing for a neurological disease called Huntington's chorea, which is something like multiple sclerosis.
More prominent in white people than black people.
That is correct. And I think that one should offer a large bonus for anyone who might be potentially carrying Huntington's chorea.
Dr. Shockley,
beyond this, it goes on with some other factors in this, but Dr. Welsing wishes to speak.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think blacks
apparently have higher heart problems. Would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general.
Go ahead. You're on Black Journal, please.
What we know about ancient black civilizations, how can American blacks suddenly be genetically regressive?
Thank you.
Let me just say this. What is very interesting is in the study of biology, biologists who have studied evolution, one of the very interesting things that they say is that the more functional skin pigment cells in the animal kingdom, the higher you are on the scale of phylogenetic ascension. In other words, nature in the course of evolution went to its highest state when it produced a cell that could produce pigment, and that we were sliding backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution. Are you aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
No, I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets longer and longer the more advanced the animal is. And that is one of the items on the racial difference, that the neurological development of blacks is faster than whites. Black babies walk on the average a month earlier than white babies. And the period of
black
gestation...
people are much more creative also than white.
Dr. Wells, Shockley, correct me if I'm incorrect. Didn't the Giselle schedule, which tested the intelligence of children, make a correlative between intelligence and walking early?
Yes.
And I would think it probably would have been negative.
No, it was not. It was positive.
Well,
the motor skills on the Giselle schedule indicated that earlier precocious walking children there was a correlation between that and high intelligence.
This may be true. It might be true within a group. I'm not sure of that.
Well, maybe
I know that there is a correlation in terms of things earlier than walking. At the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top. At the first 6 months, they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment and who don't go as far. But this, so there are a number of these things certainly to be brought in.
Fine.
But
Giselle's schedule is a very authentic, accepted, institutional, psychological experiment.
And so is the Nancy Bailey early test.
I'd like to take another caller. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello. This question is addressed to Dr. Welsing. First, I would like to say that Mr. Brown and Dr. Welsing disprove immediately Dr. Shockley's concept, because here we have two highly intelligent, gifted people. But getting this out of the way, Dr. Welsing, wouldn't you agree that there is a strong genetic component to the inheritance of intelligence? Geneticists believe that 80% component is hereditary. Let me finish, Dr. Welsing. And then also, I think the association of skin color with intelligence is an erroneous concept, and I want your views on this. Isn't it true that the historic fate of black people, the tragic deprivation, the conditions under which they were raised, any people raised under these conditions would have an hereditary, evolutionary background, which could lead to poor capacity to generalize, to conceptualize, to be creative in the form field of ideas, and develop other excellent attributes. Now, this is not a racist idea. This could happen to any group who has a tragic history of the black people.
Thank you.
No, I do not feel that there's any evidence to suggest that 80% of the ability to come to terms with your environment, that has to do with heredity. I think that much of it has to do with the environmental opportunity that the genetic material is exposed to. I think that if we look at the black people, if we just take the black group, and we look at those people who have been able to achieve, and we look at their backgrounds, we will find that they have had substantial social and economic opportunities that maybe some of the segment of the black population has not had. We will find the same thing in the white group. Those white people who have been socioeconomically deprived and at the bottom of the economic scale for whites, that these people are not performing in the same way that people who have extended socioeconomic opportunity. One of the very interesting things is that white women are now talking about women's liberation, and they are looking at their performance relative to white men, and they are saying, and all of the spokesmen for white women, and men and women are also saying, that the reason that the white woman has less confidence in her performance and is not performing as well, relatively speaking, as the white male has been the attitudes within the white family as to the role of the woman versus the role of the man. Now, what is interesting is that when white people are looking at the difference in the performance of the white woman and the white man on IQ tests, they can account for that on the basis of environmental influences. However, when they shift over into looking at whites relative to people of color, somehow they want to drop that understanding and that awareness.
It's been interesting, to say the least. I'm happy you had your say, Dr. Shockley, and Dr. Welsing. I'm happy you had yours, and thank you for being on Black Journal.
Today, another bombshell suggests empirical evidence of black biological inferiority, The Bell Curve. A book by Charles Murray and the late Richard Herrnstein cited statistics alleging that blacks on average score 15 points below whites on IQ tests. They compared averages, not individuals, the authors asserted. True, because some of the highest test scores ever registered on IQ tests were made by blacks. However, the author's premise reinforces the racialist eugenics theory of African inferiority. We invited Charles Murray to present his views on this program. He refused. But joining me to examine this issue is the woman who took on Dr. Shockley and his views on Aryan superiority. I'm Tony Brown. We'll be back with Race and Intelligence.
Tony Brown's Journal is brought to you by Pepsi and its bottlers.
This program is a part of Pepsi-Cola's continuing support of your community's cultural, educational, and business interests.
My guest is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, a psychiatrist and author of ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors. Dr. Welsing, welcome back to our series.
After 20 years.
After 20 years.
I'm glad to be here.
I'd like to say that Dr. Shockley's premise is as vivid today and as alive as it was when we did that program in 1973.
Precisely.
And his premise sounds, seems to be the father of Charles Murray's, the bell curve. Do you agree with that?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was a father. It's in the continuing wake of the discussion, the historic discussion of black genetic inferiority. I mean, a couple of years ago we were being bombarded with violence in the black community as related to black people's genetics, but not anybody else's violence being related to their genetics. And so now Charles Murray is coming out, in Richard Herrenstein, that black genetic inferiority. And as a matter of fact, Tony, I'm very happy about it. The reason being is that 24 years ago, in my paper, The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, White Supremacy, I said that the population that classifies itself as white has to continue to focus on color, genetics, sex, and numbers. And so 24 years after having made that statement, here we go again. So I'm not at all surprised, and I'm glad to have the Cress theory again validated.
Now, in both Dr. Shockley's conclusion and in the bell curve's conclusion is the conclusion that blacks are uneducable and that public policy needs to be shaped to understand, to conform with the, quote, fact that no amount of money is going to rehabilitate or habilitate, whichever you choose, black people in this country.
Exactly.
What are the implications?
Well, I think, again, the implications, first of all, we need to understand that this discussion doesn't occur in the vacuum. It occurs within what I call a global, national, local system of white supremacy. Now, what do I mean by that? I maintain, and have for the past quarter century, that the behavior that we see, including this focusing, comes about because the white population on the planet is a tiny minority population. It's not people of color who are the minorities. Whites are fewer than 1/10 of the population on the planet. Number two, and perhaps most importantly, white. You see, when white people say, I am white, they are talking genetically about a genetic recessive characteristic that is a variant of albinism, not defined by Frances Welsing. Now, that genetic recessive characteristic plus the minority status means that the white population can conceivably be genetically annihilated by genetically dominant black, brown, red, and yellow people in terms of skin coloration. So my thesis in the Cress theory was that all of the behavior, you see, the repression of blacks, the attack on black males in particular, the lynching, the castration, the obsession with saying something is wrong with your genetics, because at a subconscious level, whites are aware we are the population on the planet that is genetically vulnerable.
Now, let me give you one exception that I know of,
Go ahead.
and that is Brazil. During slavery in Brazil, racism as a premise for slavery was as uncommon as racism was a premise for slavery in the United States. And in a Brazil, the white population is diminishing, and the black population is diminishing, and the population in the middle, which is the miscegenated population, is the one that's growing. So I think there...
Well, but see, I would say, Tony, that still if you
I just
go...
want to finish one point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And my point, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I think my point is, I don't want to sound too abstract, my point is that in some parts of the world, whites don't seem to be as fearful of what you refer to as annihilation, perhaps, as in the United States.
Well, I would still say if one goes to Brazil and if you go and see who controls the banking centers, it will be a population of people that say we are white.
That's
you see,
yeah,
and
right.
at the same time, if you go to the favelas and into the slums, do you see the darkest and the blackest population.
And you're right. And the only thing I'm saying is that that population, and that population culturally, is very different from the United States. And racism wasn't the premise for slavery there, but it was the premise for slavery in the United States.
Well, you see, I say that in other words, there are variations on the theme.
Mm-hmm.
There's variation in terms of the particular language that the discussion is carried out in. But you never get away from, if you're black, stay back, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow, white, right. You see, and the more color you have to cause white genetic annihilation, then the more pressure that is put on you. So this hierarchy of color, whether you're in Asia, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in Latin America, Central America, this still obtains, but I don't want us to get lost.
No, okay, I don't. But I do want to get back to a primary point here, because I think we've jumped over it, and that is the bell curve. And let me just say this, it's not just the bell curve. The week that the bell curve came out, 2 other books came out on the same subject, and they've had so much success. The cover of Time magazine, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report had a feature story, New York Times 2 weeks in a row, very prominent play. The media just grabbed onto this idea. Now, with this happening, there's going to be a plethora of books on this very, very subject.
Precisely.
Now, in this new wave, unlike Shockley and Jensen to a lesser extent, the focus is on, quote, data, meaning that someone is empirically saying that they can demonstrate that there is biological inferiority among blacks, and that it turns on one statistic, and that one statistic is that blacks make, on average, and they were careful to say not individuals but average, because it never could have gotten off the ground with individuals, because too many black individuals are exceptions to this rule. But on average, blacks make 15 points less than whites. Now, what is your direct refutation of that alleged empirical evidence?
Well, do you see, I would say this, that first of all, I'm a psychiatrist, a general psychiatrist, child psychiatrist. We've always looked at IQ tests as being very directly related to the environment. Now, if someone doesn't want to closely examine the environment, all of the dimensions of the environment, then someone could easily say, well, it's not the environment that makes the difference. Do you see, I maintain that it is the environment that makes the difference. And on Sunday, recently, article was in one of the major newspapers in Washington, D.C., where a young white male, senior at University of Maryland, had his skin darkened, and he went to the South. He could have stayed in Maryland, but he went to the South. He was going to be black because he did not believe when blacks would say it's racism, it's racism. He thought that that was really just an excuse. So he had his skin darkened by a dermatologist, and he went to the South, and he could only tolerate the oppression for 2 days before he came running home and crying to his mother, I can't deal with it, I can't deal with it. Now, what I'm saying is that here is someone who can, you know, the chemical is not given, and so he turns back white. He knew he had that escape, but he couldn't tolerate the insults in the restaurant, the various day-to-day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week assaults that a person of color on his psyche that the person experiences.
Not physically.
Not physically,
psychologically.
you see, but it's not generally talked about. You see, in other words, he talked about such things as being ignored when he would go into a restaurant, you see, or someone saying niggers are, you know, no good. Just on and on and on and on.
Now, that's
continuous.
that overt racism, overt
well, I won't even call it overt.
Oh, okay, but
I might call, you see, shooting or lynching overt, but I'm talking about the very subtle things.
All right. And you're right. What I would like to do, however, is to identify some other environmental factors that would contribute to this 15-point gap. You've identified one, the subtle erosion of self-esteem, the subtle psychological implantation of the feeling of inferiority, which must manifest itself somewhere under some circumstance. But apart from that, what are some of the other environmental factors that you can identify?
Well, if we understand racism is a system that is operative in all areas of activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And so this barrage, full court press, is coming at you on a daily basis. If it impacts economics and labor, this means, as is the case in large numbers of black families, you're talking about a one-parent family as opposed to a two-parent family. You're talking about inadequacies or inequities in terms of wages, and all of this begins to impact on what it is that is happening in that critical unit that we call the family unit. And if that unit cannot function in a supportive manner, for example, black infants, when they are born, in the first 9 months of life are accelerated compared to white infants.
Now, how are they accelerated? How
well,
do you mean
they're
that?
accelerated in terms of such things as smiling, holding up their heads, recognition
Motor
of
activity.
faces, and motor activity. Do you see? And smiling is also intellectual activity. But with the assault of this environment in a highly structured environment that I say is structured for the purpose of white genetic survival, do you see that this begins to then take its toll? It's as though you have two races, two people running a race. One, you tie weights around their ankles, and everything else is equal, but one has weights tied around his or her ankles.
I've seen a number of studies, and frequently they seem to cluster around something happening to a black child around 7 years of age. Have you identified that age at all?
Well,
I see it everywhere. Around 7, something happens to the black child. They grow tremendously up to that point, and then all of a sudden there's a fall off.
Well, you see, the child has entered school at that point. And upon entering school, I mean, try to think about, when I think about what first grade was like, do you see, it was Dick and Jane and Spot and Puff, and a white family. It wasn't anything about a black family. It was a white family, all the pictures were white, all the presidents were white, everybody that you focused on that was doing anything, Goldilocks, Snow White, everybody is white, including a white Christmas, a white bunny rabbit. You see, so that the child is taking all of this information in about the environment and how he or she is valued or looked upon in the environment. Just learning the English language. You learn that white is pure and black is evil, black is bad. If the stock market falls, it's a Black Tuesday or a Black Monday.
Right, the bottom line, does a 15-point disparity on IQ exams make blacks genetically inferior?
Well, I would say absolutely no. Do you see? We want to get down to genetics. White is a genetic mutation from black. It is albinism. The earliest people, the first people on the planet were black people. And black people produced albinos, and you mix the two together, you get the whole human family. So I say, no, it doesn't mean that. But I want to move. Let's assume for the purpose of argument that, let's say, black people are 50 points below white people. You see, according to their tests, the bottom line is, okay, Dr. Murray, Dr. Jensen, Dr. Shockley, Dr. Herenstein, what is it that you intend to do about this? You see, are you saying, therefore, your model is Adolf Hitler and company? So we have decided that you are inferior. The bottom line is, what are you going to do about it? Because there are many children, white, black, brown, red, or yellow, who are damaged genetically, congenitally. We say they're mentally retarded. Now, we have special schools. We do everything to help these children. We put them in small classes. We give them 3 or 4 teachers. We give them all kinds of things to try to exploit the genetic potential. But now somebody comes along and says a 15-point difference means we cannot expect anything from these people. Well, if we cannot expect anything and the global economy is declining, well, gosh, we're back with Adolf. You see, well, we just cannot tolerate this debris in our population.
If I may, and I want you to continue your point. I don't want to interrupt. I do want to say this. I read an editorial recently on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, not a newspaper to take lightly. And the writer was very favorable, anti the bell curve. This was not a racist writing an article. It was a very, very objective, fair editorial. And he mentioned the eugenics movement that the Chinese are involved in terms of, in China, of culling out the bottom and reproducing the top. And he concluded that if the liberals kept on making more out of the bell curve than it is, we may see, quote, a Beijing solution in the United States.
Well, let's not go to a Beijing solution where we have a Nazi Germany solution. Do you understand? Where it wasn't just a population. I mean, there have been many populations. If a child is born defective, do you see, they do not allow that child to go on and exist. That's quite different. That's quite different than saying there are populations of people.
Genocide.
Do you see, that are superfluous and that are a contaminant, and we need to be pure and clean so that we can really arrive where we're supposed to arrive. We're back in Nazi Germany. So I say that, first of all, we have to recognize Nazi Germany was about white supremacy. It was about the white genetic population feeling that it was vulnerable to an assault by people whose real genetic origin began in North Africa. You see, their religion was not the critical issue. The issue was that they had their origins in a population that was classified as non-white. And so I say that we need to not debate numbers, because God forbid, but Dr. Murray or his grandchildren might come out with an IQ difference 15 points lower than his.
My next question will operate on the premise that your statement there is objective. Therefore, I will go to the next point. If what you're saying is true, are blacks doing anything to accelerate a process toward a, quote, final solution?
Well,
blacks themselves?
No. Do you see, the people of color on the planet who are being approached by people who have all these genetic issues in their minds, and they don't understand that white supremacy mindset, or the mindset that is feeling vulnerable to white genetic annihilation, so you have a big population conference in Cairo. To the extent that people of color on the planet do not understand this mindset, it's like being at the chessboard and not understanding the game with all of the people of color on the planet on the black side of the chessboard. And you have white supremacy, or the dynamic for white genetic survival, moving against this group of people. Now, I believe, instead of getting emotionally upset about Charles Murray's position or anybody who is in that group of thinkers, I believe, again, take out the Cress theory, see where all of this has been laid out before, predicting how this mindset operates, and begin to place oneself in a mode of understanding what the game is that is on the table.
If I can summarize the game is going to turn on public opinion. Hitler only did what he was able to do, and he was only able to do certain things because he had organized German public opinion. What, if anything, are blacks or some blacks doing in terms of accelerating a negative public opinion, or a public opinion that could come back to bite them? That's my point.
Let's take an example. A person who considers him or herself to be an actor, television actor, black, who doesn't understand this white supremacy dynamic. So somebody comes along and offers them a job, you see, but they have to act as a clown and a buffoon, and they just think, well, I'm in the abstract being an actor or an actress. Unbeknownst to them, it's a whole context in which this role is being carried out, where people feel, who have set up this image, that they need to be reinforced. See, look at blacks. They're clowns. They're stupid. They're buffoons. Look at this. This is trash.
Let's look at daytime television. Look at it for me, will you, with the eyes of a psychiatrist.
All right, the daytime talk shows.
Yes.
All right, I would say that there are many black people that are being tapped. I don't know where they go to find these people. You see, but it's this, if it's, the parallel would be, if a white person who's putting on a television show decides, let me go and get the least advantaged white person and put them up on the television continually, not the most beautiful, the most articulate, the most intelligent. No, let me go to the poorest area where there are white people and then put them up continually as a model for what white people are all about. You see, we go back to Nazi Germany and Joseph Goebbels, who understood if we keep putting out negative images of Semites and the Jewish religion, we can train the population to say, look, they're animals. They're not human. And so the sooner we get rid of them, the better. I think that many talk shows are using and trashing black people in this manner, in addition to some of the shows that come on in the evening. I can think of one of the shows that just trashes the image of black men. We complained in the 50s and the 60s and maybe the 40s about the Amos and Andy image. Those are angelic images compared to the images of black men, do you see, that are being put on the television, and this is supposed to be entertainment. I say, no, this is...
You know what I thought was remarkable, and I've read it everywhere, and that was the reaction of the vast majority of white people to the Clarence Thomas hearings. Not yea or nay Clarence or Anita Hill, but it was, I have never seen so many articulate, intelligent black people before. And
well, that was because they had been indoctrinated with the idea
with the kind of
images
you're
black
talking
genetic
about.
inferiority.
Yeah.
And I would say to the white population, I would say this, that of the people on the planet, some of the people who walk around and have to hold their heads down who are white are people whose origin is German or white South African, because they are known throughout the world to have brutalized people. You see, they're ashamed of themselves. And so I would say to white people, it's very important for them to look further than what somebody says is an objective IQ score and begin to hold the mirror up and do self-examination. Why do we have to focus on people's genetics but not be able to talk about our own genetics? For example, most of the genetic diseases are in the white population. Cystic fibrosis, Gaucher's disease. You see, these are diseases that primarily affect the white population. So all the talk about black people's genetics, sickle cell anemia, now relating hypertension to genetics, but no discussion. We are actually a population of genetic recessive individuals.
Tell me this, in the 1 minute we have left, what is the downside for white America playing with the idea of a final solution? What could they possibly lose if this thing gets out of hand?
Well, let me say this. If my brain computer was wired for white genetic survival, and I was a minority population that was genetic recessive, my brain is wired for white genetic survival. Do you see, then the brain would say, you must kill. So then you put out a movie called Natural Born Killers, or, you know, all the killing, where everybody has to get rehearsed.
What's the rational response to that?
Well, do you see, in other words, I would say that the white collective on the planet needs to get in touch with the deeper origin, the source of their behavior towards people of color on the planet. Otherwise, they are going to move in exactly and precisely the way that Nazi Germany
I must
did.
move, and I thank you, Dr. Welsing, for being with me. We're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Peace forever and always. Welcome to another edition of the Realities Temple on Earth. Your host is His Divine Masculine Brother Administrator Taalik Ibn'rad,